On his orders, people were burned alive, drowned, impaled, and cut in half. He had 7 wives and became known as the Black Widower. And finally, he brutally murdered his own son Ivan with his staff. The bloody crimes of the first Russian Tsar are well known throughout the world. But the reasons for his tyranny, as well as his personality, are still shrouded in mystery and lies. In Europe, he is still considered to be the most murderous of medieval rulers. Nobody mentions that during his reign, Ivan the Terrible only slaughtered 3,000 people. This many were killed in a single day during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris. He is remembered for being much crueler than he actually was. The Tsar's contemporaries were grateful to him. They believed that by killing the sinners, he was saving their souls before the end of the world. He was devoted to his family. So where did the rumors about him killing his own wives come from? Nor did he kill his son Ivan. So why has the myth survived for so long, eclipsing all his many achievements? During his life, he trebled Russian territory, established book printing, built St. Basil's Cathedral, and even wrote a few musical compositions. Few people know that the author of this divine music is Ivan the Terrible. Genius and evil often go hand in hand. Many tyrants before and after Ivan the Terrible were sentimental and used to enjoy musical poetry. Adolf Hitler was a fine landscape painter. Joseph Stalin perfectly described nature in his poetry. It was Stalin's will that director Sergei Eisenstein created the most famous movie depiction of Ivan the Terrible. To the murderous Soviet leader, the first Russian Tsar was a spiritual teacher and an example to many. Thanks to Stalin, the world would find out how Ivan the Terrible really looked. Sculptor and anthropologist Mikhail Gerasimov was willing to reconstruct the Tsar's face using his skull. At first, Stalin was very interested in this project. But then he changed his mind and didn't give permission to exhume Ivan the Terrible's remains. Memories of the Gerasimov's fatal opening of Tamerlane's tomb in the Gure Amir Mausoleum were still fresh. On June the 21st, 1941, scientists removed the remains of the warrior emperor, ignoring the inscription on the wall warning, "Whoever opens this tomb will release God of War." A day later, war broke out. Unlike Gure Amir's mausoleum, the ancestral tomb of Ivan the Terrible had no warnings. But there was quite enough mysticism around the Tsar's name. The writer Vsevolod Garshin committed suicide by jumping out of a window right after posing for Repin's painting Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan. The actor Nikolai Kamelev died on the Moscow Art Theatre stage dressed as Ivan the Terrible. Eisenstein's 2-part film, Ivan the Terrible, remained unfinished. While working on the second part, the director suddenly died of a heart attack. The mystery surrounding Ivan the Terrible is ongoing. Evgeny Evstigniev starred as Ivan the Terrible in the film Yermak, and 10 days later, he died. Oleg Borisov died shortly after playing the role of Ivan in the movie The Storm Over Russia. During the filming of this movie, actor Yuri Astafyev died of a heart attack. Actors Sergei Bondarchuk, Vaclav Dvoretsky, and director Alexei Saltykov died shortly before the premiere of the same movie. This must have been more than just a coincidence. On the orders of Nikita Khrushchev, archaeologists and criminologists opened the tomb of Ivan the Terrible in the 1950s. The new General Secretary knew that Stalin admired Ivan the Terrible. Khrushchev wanted to prove that Stalin's favorite historical character was a murderous tyrant. Using the remains of the skull of Ivan the Terrible, Gerasimov restored his sculptural portrait, and all doubts vanished. Such a person could be capable of anything. An ominous hooked nose, a face full of disgust and cruelty. Only on closer examination could one see his deep sadness and self-loathing. These are the features not of a cruel ruler, but of a common man nearing death with a heavy heart. But what was depressing the murderous tyrant? Moscow was trembling from peals of thunder and lightning. People cried out, just as the Holy Fool predicted. On that day was born the son of the Grand Prince of Moscow, Ivan. And according to prophecy, his reign would be as troublesome as that rainy day. Prince Vasily III was infinitely happy. Finally, he was holding his successor in his arms. He had been waiting for this moment for 25 years. For the sake of this tiny creature, he had committed a crime. He had locked his first wife, the Baron Solomonia Saburova, to a monastery. He was told that the enraged woman was cursing him and his new family. But the Tsar wasn't worried. He was sure that with his new wife, the Lithuanian princess Elena Glinskaya, who was half his age, he would soon become a father. For 4 long years, the princess could not become pregnant. Was this because of the curse? If so, he would need to kill his former wife. Solomonia was saved by the news that Elena Glinskaya had finally become pregnant. But Vasily III's happiness was short-lived. He only enjoyed his long-awaited successor, Ivan, for 3 years, and his second son, Yuri, for just a few moments after his birth. An abscess on the prince's thigh led to blood poisoning and a quick death. His wife was widowed, and her young sons were now orphans. Before his death, Prince Vasily III bequeathed his throne to 3-year-old Ivan. But up until the age of 15, his mother regent and 7 boyar tutors remained by his side. After the funeral, these tutors, instead of taking care of the little prince, started fighting over who would be the main tutor. They became competitive and started poisoning each other, dreaming of changing their boyar's hat for a monomax cap. They ignored Tsarina and young Ivan. A boyar's rebellion was in the air. Elena Glinskaya realized that both she and her son were in danger. She took matters into her own hands, ordering an immediate currency reform. Counterfeiters were becoming increasingly brazen, so it was necessary to put new money into circulation. In fact, the princess had an ulterior motive. Earlier silver coins had shown a horseman wielding a sword. He was replaced by a spearman. The word kopia, spear, gave the coin its name, kopieka. The horseman on the coins looked like an iconographical image of St. George the Victorious, the patron saint of Moscow, with one difference. St. George had the face of Ivan Vasilievich, confirmed by the inscription on the coin. Tsar and Grand Prince of all Russia Ivan. Elena ordered the manufacture of these coins so that the people would know their Tsar and not confuse him with impostors. But another danger lurked. In Moscow, there were persistent rumors that the first wife of late Prince, the nun Solomonia, gave birth to the Tsar's heir in a monastery. And now Ivan had a dangerous rival who could claim his right to the throne. Solomonia herself hadn't denied these rumors. When Vasily III was still alive, he was very concerned about the rumors and had even sent inspectors to the monastery. But Solomonia refused to show them her son George. The day would come when her son would become Tsar and take revenge for his mother. Vasily III was outraged by these threats. He had sent boyars and high-ranking ecclesiastics to the monastery. Solomonia didn't dare resist such a respected delegation. She was forced to admit that her son George, the Tsar's descendant, had died shortly after his birth. And she even showed his grave to the commission. But still, the shadow of an older brother would haunt Ivan the Terrible for a long time. The reason was both real and mystical. In 1934, the chief of Suzdal Museum, Alexei Varganov, organized excavations in Pokrovsky Monastery. Suddenly, between the graves of two nuns, he noticed a nameless tomb. The researcher was astonished. What if it's the legendary grave of Prince George, the eldest son of Vasily III? After all, Solomonia, the disgraced wife of the Tsar, was buried next to this grave. The nameless grave was opened, but inside they only found a wooden doll in a silk dress. Why had Solomonia buried a doll? Did this child actually exist? If so, perhaps the mother wanted to protect her child from death. And if the kid did not exist, then the doll could only mean one thing: a ritual burial. Solomonia's contemporaries therefore accused her of witchcraft. Since childhood, he believed in Solomonia's curse. How else could he explain that people close to him were dying, including his mother and father and various other relatives? As time passes, the fear of this curse will turn Ivan into a murderous maniac. Suspicion turned to paranoia and a lust for revenge. His mother's fear for their safety had a profound effect on the young Ivan. At that time in Russia, the Grand Prince was not the sole ruler. He had to act in accordance with the top boyars, the oligarchy of the time. Ivan's father, Vasily III, was the first who tried to limit the boyars' power. Elena Glinskaya attempted to fulfill her husband's will. She didn't listen to the boyars and insisted on doing it alone. She wanted to be an example to her son, but she had no time. Ivan was in his 8th year when his beautiful mother started deteriorating in front of him. Elena Glinskaya tried to prevent the mysterious illness by visiting a shrine that seemed to have healing qualities. But public affairs were waiting for her in Moscow, and she had to return. In such a hostile environment, she relapsed. Ivan kept believing that his mother would recover until the moment of her death. Elena Glinskaya was buried suspiciously on the very same day. The reason for such haste has only just been revealed. A high concentration of mercury was found in her remains. This is a direct indication that she had been slowly poisoned. Ivan the Terrible often suspected that his loved ones were being poisoned, but he didn't realize that his mother had been poisoned. And so Ivan was left alone with his hostile tutors. He had become a powerless, lonely puppet, devoid of communication. The person he felt closest to, his younger brother Yuri, was a deaf and dumb cripple. Ivan's favorite nanny and the loyal boyars were killed or sent away. Soon, Ivan realized that they could not touch him. Despite his youth, the people and foreign guests saw him as the rightful ruler. During all great occasions and ambassadors' receptions, the prince was in the spotlight. But once the festivity was over, Ivan was forgotten about. Even for the basic necessities like food and water, he had to wait. He was left helplessly knocking at the closed door. They would only talk to Ivan to tell him about the rumors about his elder brother. They called him a bastard. Prince Andrew Shuisky was particularly cynical. While the boy was choking down stale bread, the boyar sat there with his dirty boots on his late mother's bed. With a nasty grin, he would recall the rumors about her affair with Fyodor Ovchina and how Ivan had been conceived in sin. The young Tsar silently took the insults, but he swore not to forget anything. The boy was often tormented by nightmares, but the dreams were suddenly interrupted by an even more terrible reality. In the middle of the night, in front of Ivan, Shuisky nearly killed the Metropolitan, who was devoted to the royal family and supported Vasily III in his desire to limit the power of the boyars. Trying to escape from death, the Metropolitan sought protection near the young ruler, but so far, Ivan had been powerless to do anything. He clenched his fists and dreamt of revenge. He took his rage out on cats, cutting off their tails and throwing them out of windows. The boyars turned a blind eye to his sadistic outbursts. In fact, they found them useful, dispatching their enemies using Ivan's hands. Just for fun, the boyars encouraged him to set dogs on objectionable people. As Ivan was growing up, 5 different ruling boyar factions had changed, each one trying to use the Tsar for their own purpose. But suddenly, for the first time, the Tsar took the initiative and set the dogs on his abuser, Andrew Shuisky. You see, when Boyar Shuisky told him, "God knows who got your mother pregnant," he handed him over to the huntsman. The prince's death was horrific. The boyars became scared. Suddenly, their puppet had become uncontrollable. Ivan is 16. A year had passed since gaining his majority and ridding himself of his tutors. And today, he will make his first step towards becoming sole leader. From now on, he will no longer be the Grand Prince of Moscow, but the Tsar of all Russia. In public, Ivan wore the monomach's cap and received the other tokens of supreme power. But his coronation was different from other Byzantine emperors and of Grand Prince Vladimir. Ivan was anointed. In every person's life, this ritual is held once, twice in a Tsar's life. The power of Ion IV was blessed by God. Back then, only two monarchs were called Tsars, the Byzantine Emperor and the Khan of the Golden Horde. By proclaiming himself Tsar, he brought himself up to the level of these monarchs. 2 weeks later, the royal crown was placed on Ivan's head once again. This time, he was getting married, swearing to be faithful until his death. Ivan had chosen Anastasia Zakharina among 1,500 candidates for the title of the first Tsarina of Russia. It was love at first sight. Ivan would keep her in his heart for the rest of his life. Hugging his young wife, he dreamt that they would live happily and die together. But it was not meant to be. His beloved wife would be beside him only for 13 happy years. Historians call those mystical 13 years the bloodless period. It is believed that he turned into a maniacal tyrant after the death of his beloved wife. In fact, his transformation began 6 months after his wedding, when for the first time, death looked him in the eye. That day, a disaster took place in the Kremlin. The big bell fell to the ground. It was an ominous sign. The young Tsar refused to believe in omens. The big bell had fallen from the Kremlin belfry. So what? He was fine. He had a loving family and unlimited power. Ivan was planning to introduce several government reforms and was preparing for a military campaign to increase his possessions. But soon he realized that even with the royal crown on his head, he was vulnerable to attacks from his enemies. He was the same boy whose destiny was not just to live, but to survive. A week after the fall of the bell, the Great Moscow Fire broke out. The city was in flames. People were burning to death. Their homes had turned to ashes. The fire raged for 2 days. Nearly 2,000 Muscovites died. People were talking of deliberate arson, then of God's judgment. They looked for a scapegoat. The boyars took advantage of the situation. They started a rumor that it was the Tsar's grandmother, Anna Glinskaya's fault. They accused her of witchcraft. People claimed she removed the hearts of dead men, turning them into ashes and scattering them over Moscow, disguised as a magpie to burn it down. In the 16th century, fables were easily believed, like the fable that the young Tsar himself was under these charms and his blood was spoiled, and that somewhere his elder brother, the son of Solomonia, the first wife of Vasily III, was growing up in secret. Maybe he would be a better ruler. An angry mob rushed to seek the royal grandparent witch. All of Glinsky's family suffered. People burned their possessions and rushed to a village near Moscow looking for the Tsars. They were hiding the young ruler with his family and friends. Ivan felt his life was in danger. For the first time, he faced people's rage and he was confused. He didn't know yet how to suppress a riot. And now he was scared. Soon he would be blamed for all the troubles and be torn to pieces. He was saved by the priest Sylvester, the confessor of Ivan's late mother, Elena Glinskaya, and devoted friend of the royal family. He appeared before the people and, like a prophet, started to blame the Tsar for his sins, as if they really had caused all the troubles. If the Tsar were to repent in public now, all disasters would cease. Sylvester led the Tsar out to the people. With tears of repentance, Ivan fell to his knees before the brutal mob. He asked for forgiveness from the people and God for his sins and those of his relatives. People were shocked. They were expecting anything but a sincere repentance. They waited in silence for a while and then humbly went away. Saved from the angry mob, Ivan felt gratitude and infinite trust towards the wise priest and treated him as his spiritual mentor. Sylvester was very religious and even exalted in his faith. He heard voices, saw signs, and with sparkling eyes, he repeated, "God's will is in everything." Very soon, under Sylvester's influence, the impulsive and insecure Ivan turned into a religious fanatic, convinced he was on a special mission. He was the only ruler crowned by God. Hence, no imaginary brother could claim his right. People will not riot again. He is God's vicar on earth, and he was as powerful as God. His reign would glorify Russia for centuries. 1552 and 1560 is the period of victories. He succeeded where both his grandfather and his father had failed. He occupied tremendous countries like Khanate of Kazan, Astrakhan and Siberia. He proclaims himself Tsar. The ambassadors come to him. He works alongside the chosen council, the elite, the highest aristocracy of the relatively young state that includes Sylvester, Adashev and Kurbsky. A lot of books are being published. Codes of law are being written. The diplomacy, army and the administrative machinery all work fine. State revenue increases. This was a golden period for Russia. The only disturbing thing was the boyars' concealed resistance. They were destroying his proteges and giving orders of mass executions in the name of the Tsar. He needed a plan to tame the hated boyars. He thought about it day and night, until he was suddenly taken ill. For the second time in his life, death stared him in the face. Ivan started writing his will. He gathered the boyars and ordered them to swear loyally to his newborn son Dmitri. The boyars refused. They thought that the Tsar would not recover, and it was necessary to leave a free passage to the throne after his death. Unexpectedly, Sylvester also refused to swear loyalty to Ivan's son. He had a vision that soon the boy would die. Sick and tired of long negotiations with the boyars, the Tsar was frightened and then became furious. His spiritual mentor, the loyal Sylvester, acted together with the boyars. A foul traitor, the Tsar ordered the immediate seizure of the priest and his imprisonment in a remote monastery for the rest of his life. The boyars were taken aback by the Tsar's rage, so they accepted all his wishes. Ivan got his way. His 4-month-old son was recognized as his successor. Soon after, the Tsar made a surprising recovery. During his illness, Ivan swore to make a pilgrimage to holy places with his family in case of recovery. It's said that a well-known Orthodox enlightener, Maximus the Greek, tried to talk Ivan out of taking his 6-month-old son on such a long journey to avoid tragedy. But disappointed by Sylvester, the Tsar wouldn't listen to another prophet. Whilst boarding a boat for the river crossing, the bridge under the royal procession wobbled. The startled nanny let go of the prince, and he fell to the bottom of the river like a stone. In a moment, the bridge collapsed, and the Tsar, his wife and nanny found themselves in the icy water. After several dives, the royal heir was taken from the water. Ivan Vasilievich took the baby in his arms and, with tears, watched his son die. After his son's funeral, the Tsar started to think about the causes of the tragedy. The baby could not have been dropped intentionally. The nanny who carried him was supported by Tsarina Anastasia's brothers. But to make the bridge collapse was easy enough. Was that attempted murder? Probably. But who? The boyars, of course. Confident that his son had been killed by the boyars, the Tsar began brutal reprisals. He gave orders to arrest those who refused to swear loyalty to the prince and execute them in public as conspirators. Blinded by his own grief and revenge, he had chosen the most severe punishment. All 12 boyars were impaled. The news of the terrible boyar's death and Tsar's bloodthirstiness spread quickly. And talks about the Tsar's dethronement started again. Spontaneous riots began to break out, but the Tsar wasn't scared any longer. With the army's help, he could suppress any unrest. So Ivan Vasilievich didn't worry about the riots. At the same time, his beloved wife was dying of an unknown illness. She died quite young. From that moment on, Ivan Vasilievich changed. He was only 30 years old, but sufferings and anguish disfigured his face forever, turning him into an exhausted old man. In Moscow, there was even a rumor that the Tsar was replaced. He always kept his pain well hidden, sure that his wife had been poisoned. It was the boyar's revenge for the public execution. Ivan Vasilievich had not been mistaken. Gerasimov's group of anthropologists found in Tsarina Anastasia's remains large amounts of mercury. The same was true for his second wife, Caucasian Princess Maria Temryukovna, and also his third one, Marfa Sobakina. The boyars were poisoning Ivan the Terrible's wives and spreading rumors that the Tsar was killing them with his bare hands. The myth of the Black Widower was born. Its purpose was to scare people and raise them against the despot. To fight the boyars, it was not enough to accuse them of poisoning his wife. He had to prove that they were enemies of the people. At the time, all states' foreign policy was simple. Attack or you'll be attacked. To halt the aggression of neighbors, a country had to start a war with them. And back then, all wars needed considerable funds and the oligarchs' willingness to provide them. The Tsar suggested to the Boyars' Council a law to transfer the Boyars' lands to the state treasury. As expected, the Boyars' Council rejected the bill. This would be the last straw. The Boyars had not only betrayed the Tsar, but the interests of the state. On the 3rd of December 1564, a strange procession went out of the Kremlin gates. Sleighs carried royal processions and the Tsar himself out of the capital. And then the charter came. A royal herald proclaimed it from the squares of towns and cities for everybody to hear. The Tsar Ivan Vasilievich abdicated. Russia had never seen anything like it before. It was a brilliant tactical move. The Tsar warned that because of the Boyars' betrayals, people were to face brutal war and be treated like slaves under a foreign ruler. He sincerely repented of his sins, his weakness and inability to save people from the Boyars. He reminded them that he was God's vicar and his will was the will of God. People believed him. So what? All simple folks of Moscow, led by Metropolitan, asked him to return to Moscow, and he returned. The Tsar returned to Moscow and imposed a state of emergency and launched a giant repressive machine called Oprichnina. The Tsar formed the army of oprichniks from poor children of the nobility. He gave some land and gold from the treasury to each of them. Grateful to the monarch, oprichniks enthusiastically rushed to prove their loyalty. Their work was to learn about the slightest manifestations of dissatisfaction with the Tsar's policy and to punish rebellious boyars and their accomplices. Their emblem was a dog's head and a broom to sniff out treason and mercilessly sweep out the traitors. People were killed on the slightest suspicion or slander. The country was overrun with the guilty and innocent blood. The apotheosis was the massacre of Novgorod inhabitants, where the oprichniks discovered a plot. The local boyars decided to decoy Ivan Vasilievich in Novgorod, seize him and give him away to the Polish king. And in his place put Ivan's cousin, who was weak-willed and easily controlled by the boyars. The reaction of Tsar and his loyal oprichniks was terrible. More than 2,000 people were executed or tortured to death in Novgorod. Families were seized and tortured. The largest execution took place on the Volga River. Convicts were tied up and burned, and then, while still alive, were thrown into the water. Ivan himself came up with this punishment for a reason. In fact, during Ivan the Terrible's reign, people were expecting the end of the world. Chronicles report that the prophecies at the time foresaw the apocalypse as occurring in 70/70th. That is, in 1569 AD. 4 years before that date, the Tsar, using Oprichnina terror, tried to clear the country of the boyars. But as the fatal date approached, his unlimited power and religious fanaticism had created in Tsar's fevered imagination another idea. He was repeating, Tsar's will is God's will. And those who Tsar considers as sinners are sinners before God. And he, Ivan Vasilievich, has the right to punish them as God punishes at the Last Judgment. Once again, Ivan the Terrible was rereading the Apocalypse. For 4 years, he was punishing sinners, cleansing them before their death with fire and water, and then at night, he prayed for their sinful souls. But 70/70th passed, and the Last Judgment didn't come. Were the prophets wrong? Was it all in vain? Ivan Vasilievich was horrified. If so, then he is the greatest sinner. He must pray and ask God's forgiveness for having dared to equate himself with the Lord. Something desperate was awakening in him, a human despair. What have I done to this world? But the retribution that would come to the Tsar a year before his death would be almost worse than the Day of Judgment. With horror, Ivan watched his son's face turn into a deathly, impassive mask. It was the same as when his mother was dying. In his youth, he was holding the little Prince Dmitri. In his later years, he was at the deathbed of his beloved wife Anastasia. He was looking at his son Ivan and could do nothing. God was punishing him. He took away his pride and hope. The right to decide whether to live or die belongs only to him, the Lord. Where does this popular version of Ivan the Terrible killing his son with his staff come from? This legend was depicted by Ilya Repin in his painting, and he depicted it so realistically that women were fainting in front of it. Today, historians believe it was a rumor started by Antony Posavin, a Jesuit monk, who in 1581 came to Ivan the Terrible from Polish King Stefan Batory for truce talks. In the course of negotiations, the monk suddenly laid down a condition: to submit the Russian Church to the Pope. Ivan Vasilievich angrily refused and removed the monk from the chambers. After this, at the court of Batory and other European rulers, they started to talk about the cruel temper of the Russian Tsar. In a quarrel with his daughter-in-law, Ivan's wife, the prince stood up for her. And the Tsar hit him with a staff. Nothing else is known about his murder. The chronicles say that the prince died in a non-violent death, but the brutal version completed the image of a Tsar despot. It was hard not to believe it, because Ivan the Terrible openly blamed himself for his son's death. But obviously, he meant a different thing. Ivan the Terrible wanted to fall on his knees, but he couldn't. He was in severe pain. Even his body would not obey him. He had enraged God. He had gone too far. He had no right to decide who to punish and who to forgive. People's lives are not within his power. God showed him that by taking away his son. But he has two other successors, Fyodor and Dmitri. May God forgive him. cure Fyodor's madness and give long life to 10-year-old Dmitri. And he, the murderous Tsar, would always remember the names of all those he had condemned to death. He would spend all his money trying to save their souls. After his son's death, Ivan ordered to make the Synodic, a list of all the people who suffered during his reign. It meant their complete remission. Ivan the Terrible had made generous donations to the largest monasteries where monks were praying for the souls of these victims. Based on his commemoration list, the Tsar's victims numbered 3,000. He was 52, but the Tsar looked like an old man. His body was swelling from dropsy and rotting from the inside. No perfume could drown the stench of decay. A strong pain in his spine paralyzed his hands. He longed for death. He could no longer stand the physical sufferings and mental anguish, but his death was slow and painful. According to his last will before his death, he had been made a monk. To be honest, I think Ivan the Terrible was a victim of history, despite the incredible victims of his despotic acts. For a very simple reason, he was trying to create an integrated Russia, but through limitless violence. During the life of Ivan IV, no one called him Ivan the Terrible. This nickname appeared in folk songs much later. After the Tsar's death, the time of troubles began. At the beginning of the 17th century, the civil war took hundreds of thousands of lives. Ivan the Terrible's massacre of 3,000 victims pales in comparison. Ivan Vasilievich knew that he would not go to heaven, and he knew what hell was long before his death. When he realized that, he undertook the functions of God